Put so much work into making this a great big success today. Hey! We call her Natalie the Organizer Fletcher because that's all she ever does. She just organizes. And I want to also thank all the amazing unions that have taken time today to put up all these great tents and come out and help serve the community. I'm not going to list them all because I'll forget everybody. Just take a bit of a 360 and look around to see who's here. Such support for this community. It's great to see. And I know others have said this as well, and you're probably getting tired of hearing this, but it'd be remiss for me not to thank Mayor Lynn Hall and Council for all the amazing support you give to working people all the time. It's just such an important thing to see a council work together like you do on behalf of working people and all folks in Prince George, and I think you deserve to hear the appreciation of folks from all over this city. Thanks so much for what you do. And I just have to say, it's always fun following, and it is an honor actually to have the provincial president of QPBC here, Paul Farrell. We were just joking earlier, I'm always giving him a hard time down the Lower Mainland because he's always shivering and he's cold, and here I am sweating in this wool jacket, and Buddy shows up in his shorts, eh? Nice work. You're an honorary Northerner, at least for today. Now it's my absolute pleasure on behalf of our President Irene Lanzinger and over 500,000 unionized workers across the province of British Columbia to bring you greetings on Labor Day of all days. It is such an important day, and I'm always hesitant to get into any labor history when somebody like Peter Ewart has spent some time speaking to you because he's such an expert on these topics. But it is a good day for us to look back and reflect on the history of working people in this province, because as everybody here knows so well, British Columbia was built by working people. It was built in the resource communities spanning this province. And it was built not just by European immigrants that came here, but as we know so well, it was built on the backs of hardworking immigrant labor, primarily from China. I just had the great pleasure, and I do this at least once a year. I say I pay my taxes in Barkerville. I like to go there to revel in some of the history of working people in that old mining town. And what strikes me every time I go there is how the labor movement has transitioned over the years from being an organization that fought really hard just to try to bring workers' organizations together to move all in one direction all at the same time, and how tough that was, and how many sacrifices were made to keep that movement going. And I'm proud to say today here that we're celebrating our 107th anniversary as a provincial federation of labor, founded in 1910 in Victoria in British Columbia. And that is really something, because it's never been easy to convince working people that our best weapon, the biggest tool in our working box, in our toolbox, is solidarity and our ability to work together and stick together. And it's especially difficult for us to understand that, given that employers have been so successful over the last century at keeping us divided, at finding ways to divide working people based on the color of their skin, or the language they speak, or their gender, or their sexual orientation, or all the number of things that have been used successfully to keep working people divided for far more than a century, but certainly here in British Columbia as well. And it's important, I think, for us, especially people who look like me, to pay tribute as often as possible to the non-white workers in British Columbia, and particularly Chinese workers who built this province, often being sent into mines for 1/10 of what a white worker would make, carrying sticks of dynamite. It's important for us to recognize that and to understand that as difficult as it's been for all of us to make life better for working people, for those who didn't have the benefit of a union, it was even more difficult. And that's been going on for a long time. And part of the history I wanted to talk to you about is for us to be very clear about the mistakes that we've made in our own history in the labor movement, so that we can better ensure that we don't make those same mistakes again. And I don't want to bore you with too much history, but it's very important for us to remember. I was reading through a few old history books just in preparation for Labor Day and knowing I wanted to talk to you about this. And I was struck by some of the debates that we had at BC Federation of Labor conventions about 100 years ago, where the biggest topic of debate was whether or not Asian workers should be excluded from the province of British Columbia, or whether they should be allowed to work here. And I'm sad to say that our labor movement, the one that I help represent now, made a mistake in those days. we had a choice. We had a choice between inclusion of all workers, irrespective of all the things that divide us, on one hand, and exclusion of workers based on some of those things that divide us. And we made the wrong choice. We passed resolutions at the BC Federation of Labour that talked about the exclusion of Asiatics from British Columbia. We talked about excluding workers from India who were starting to work in some sawmills a few years later. And it's important for us to take this into account as we move forward, because it wasn't until about 1914 that an amazing president of the BC Federation of Labour by the name of Joe Naylor, a fellow who was also, I should say, a member of a party that many of you probably didn't know existed, the Socialist Party of British Columbia, who held at least 3 seats in government, and as the circumstances would dictate, the balance of power between the Liberals and the Conservatives. Not at all unlike the political dynamics we see currently. And he made a decision at a BC Federation of Labour convention in that year that was very unpopular at the time, because there was a resolution that wanted to expand the opinion of Labour at that time to exclude workers from its ranks based on their race. It wanted to expand that exclusion to all of Canada. And there was a resolution put on the floor for debate at that convention that called for the exclusion of all Asiatics from Canada. And the president of the BC Federation of Labour took a very controversial decision. He argued against that decision. And he argued with such ferocity that he was able to win the day and defeat it. And the argument that he made, and it was quite an insight at the time, he said, it's not the Chinese workers that Robert Dunsmuir has marched in to do our work while we're on strike in the mines that is attacking our ability to better our lives. It's the dirty, and pardon my language, but this is what he said, it's the dirty scabs from my country, England, who didn't have RCMP pushing them to work at the order of the mine boss to do our work. It was those dirty scabs who made a choice to cross that picket line and do our work when they knew very well that that was going to attack our rights to benefit our families and to improve our standard of living. And that was extremely unpopular, but it was true. And the reason I'm telling you this, friends, is that we exist at a time in British Columbia right now, over 100 years later, where we have forms of indentured servitude and forms of slavery even today. And what I'm speaking about are the thousands of temporary foreign workers who work in very difficult conditions in their home countries, but are even today recruited actively and sold a very bright promise of a greater future to come here to British Columbia and other places in Canada. And I'm speaking about the hundreds of vegetable farms in the Lower Mainland, in the Okanagan, and a number of places in home care. And we're starting to see live-in nannies do this kind of work, working under temporary foreign worker licenses. And they have absolutely no rights. They have no ability to join a union even if they wanted to. Because the moment they sign a union card, their employer lets them go, and they're indentured to that employer. Their ability to stay in this country is attached to that contract. And so as soon as they decide to take this position, that they want to benefit that they want to increase their own standards of living, they get sent home. That's not freedom of choice, sisters and brothers. That is a form of slavery, and it exists today. And it doesn't exist in some foreign country somewhere in some far-off land. It exists here in British Columbia. And it's incumbent upon us, those of us who care about working people of all kinds, to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes that we've made in the past. That when we have a choice between inclusion of all workers on one hand and exclusion of workers based on reasons we should never exclude anybody, we have to make the right choice, yeah? And we cannot simply say if they want to join the labor movement, they just simply need to join a union. Because here's the reality of the labor movement today. If you want to participate in what we like to call the Workers' Parliament, a BC Federation of Labour convention, the state has to recognize you're a union before you can come as a delegate. That's not how we founded this movement. Workers joined unions and organized them themselves in their own workplaces. And then they got together and they formed their own parliament and they passed strong progressive resolutions. They didn't wait for government to say you're allowed to attend. And so it's incumbent upon us, I think, and in keeping with the theme of this Labor Day, past, present, future of the labor movement, to look forward to find ways to reform ourselves to ensure that we are inclusive of workers, whether they're in a union or not, whether they were born in this country or not, to be able to play a role in our parliament and to make sure they play a role in the working class in British Columbia. Because sisters and brothers, if you want to be here for whatever reason, if you want to raise a family here, if you want to work here, if you want to build this province, then I think together we have to resolve that it doesn't matter. If you've been here for 500 generations or 5 minutes, you get to stay, you get to work, and you get to have the same working conditions as every worker in British Columbia, because that's what founded this province, but we gotta fight for it. So let's resolve today to fight for that, and we can only ever do it together. Let's get started. Thank you.